Greetings, students of Great Basin Traditional Cultures. Woo! So today we're entering into our case study phase for the Great Basin, and you have a lot of reading out of the handbook of North American Indians on the Great Basin, a volume edited by Dr. Warren D'azevedo, who has since passed, but who was a brilliant man and whose work is actually a great source of information for this talk that I'm giving today, in a volume that he published with or that was published by the Nevada State Museum on his analysis and contemporary ethnographic work, and also historic work. The man was brilliant, and he was a brilliant writer, and he's just a great guy. Super. I mean, just a teacher's teacher. I can't even tell you. He was just a wonderful person. And he wrote this volume, The Two Worlds of Lake Tahoe, and looking at Cave Rock and doing research on Cave Rock on behalf of the tribe to ascertain whether or not Cave Rock was a significant place and how it would be significant in contemporary times. And he did that. So today we're going to talk about Washoe religion, but not on a huge general scale and about all the kinds of features of that. Of course, you've got Warren's chapter on Washoe, which is it's the longest chapter in the handbook. So and for him, it was a very significant piece to get his work out there. He'd worked with Washoe for a long, long time, and kept up relationships with people until his death. But anyway, we're going to talk about power, belief, and contested places. And in terms of power, we're talking about supernatural forces being concentrated at places like Cave Rock, but we're also talking about political power and the lack thereof that the Washoe had for a long time, and then the gaining of political power and a voice that could be heard, and the ability to take on the U.S. government about beliefs in contested places, beliefs in places, beliefs of what occurred at places, why it's important, and then contesting the use of places, that you have different interest areas here. You've got the U.S. government and its Forest Service management of Cave Rock. They are the technical federal owners of Cave Rock. And you have different land use practices and different belief systems at all about what these places are. And so it's really an interesting story, and one in which the actual outcome was that the Washoe won their case. And they won their case, it was about in regard to rock climbing at Cave Rock. So we'll get into that, but it really is a fascinating story, and it's one of a little tribe, little in terms of its space and population, but boy, they hit it, and they hit it hard, and they did it. And it's pretty cool. So here we go. Okay, you guys, so here you have a map, two maps, one showing you on the left the traditional territory of Washoe people, and then one on the right the location of Cave Rock at Lake Tahoe. On the map on the left, you see that dark green area is really the heart of the Washoe homeland, and that extends down into, you can see that, there's kind of a narrow strip up on the left side. Let me get my little, what color should I get, you guys? I think I'll do the yellow thing. Okay. So, eek. Okay, over here at Lake Tahoe, oh, that doesn't show up very well at all. Ooh, and look at that great drawing, you guys. Anyway, there's a very thin strip there of, heartland territory on the west side of Lake Tahoe, and then you can see the territory broadens out as we get on the east side. And really what you're looking at there is the Sierra, okay, the top of the Sierra. And so a lot of the traditional homeland of Washoe people was on the Sierra on the eastern side down into those first valleys. So you're looking at the Reno area, Carson City, Gardnerville, and those valley systems there. And then when we get into the light green area, you're looking at kind of a hinterland, if you will, of Washoe territory, an area very much used by Washoe, but not necessarily the heartland. But what you can see is there's some major rivers in here, there's some major mountains. I mean, gosh, to have the Sierra, woohoo! Lots of different kind of water systems, which are really important. And we've talked about our acorn use. And so you can see these little arrows pointing down to acorns, acorns, acorns on the west side of the Sierra. And of course, then at the heart of Washoe territory is the crown jewel, if you will, Lake Tahoe, which today is a world destination for tourism. It's also a place that the Washoe hold dear in their hearts and have some land use, activities there now, which is great, and that they have they've never gone away from these places. They've never gone away from Lake Tahoe. There's an amazing history of how this land has been used, and a lot of it has to do with the Comstock and deforestation that occurred, which is something I think that we don't really know in Nevada history, of how much timber was needed to fuel the mining industries in the mid 1800s. And so and the Washoe people were very much subject to the difficulties that all entailed, not to mention just your general contact situation. So on the right hand side you can see where Cave Rock is located on this blurry map. It's in Nevada, the Nevada side of the lake. And then here, okay, it barely shows up. There's Highway 50. And Highway 50 blasts right through Cave Rock. And that was one of the first significant impacts to Cave Rock, although they had occurred before. So Cave Rock has always been an important place for Washoe people before and after contact. It's just been a central place, but not a central place as we normally understand it. It was not a place people flooded to, like, whoa, we had an annual Washoe gathering at Cave Rock. Cave Rock was a power place, and it's a power place, and the kind of power place it was and is a place that you avoid. You don't go there, which is something that people from a European model, a European descent, have a hard time understanding. But that was the use, and that is actually a philosophy. That difference in belief and in the nature of power is one of those things that tribal groups all over the world come up against, with other kinds of people who are managers of places, and it happens all over the world. It's not an exception in the Great Basin, North America, Australia, New Zealand, any of those places. It's just very much a big miscommunication, something very difficult for non-native people to understand, but a very important thing for people to understand. So Cave Rock has remained an important place for Washoe people who adhere to traditional values. And what that means is you have a lot of variance in how Washoe people today believe in Cave Rock. And of course that's true. You have a ton of culture change. You have the embracing of Christian values and the abandonment or just a total lack of knowledge about traditional values. So you see a lot of variation in contemporary groups of how, and contemporary individuals, of how they view this place. But it has been found that there was a cultural significance that remains, that was something that the Forest Service had to deal with. So Cave Rock has been utterly transformed by the incursion of Euro-Americans at Lake Tahoe. For many decades, the Washoe suffered greatly after contact, and were actually thought to be a people who would go extinct, which I find to be still, to this day, an amazing fact, that people viewed the Washoe as being on the verge of extinction. And that's just, anyway, and thankfully they're not. And they're with us, they're well. And they have an amazing webpage if you want to go there. Anyway, it's, and they're present. They are just present. They are part of the world over there in Reno, Carson, and Gardnerville, and at the lake. When the impacts to Cave Rock occurred, and I'm using that term with quotes around it, the place has not been destroyed. It has been severely impacted. And even when you have land use that changes the nature of a feature, a natural feature like Cave Rock, for Native people, the meaning and the power behind it may not have changed all that much, which is another thing that people from non-native perspective have a hard time understanding. Well, it's like, it's not the way it was, so obviously it doesn't mean the same thing. And it's like, well, it kind of does. And that's something you have to let the people decide, not land managers or non-native people. But anyway, when the impacts were occurring at Cave Rock, the Washoe people had no voice. They had no power. Again, they were a very decimated tribal group who really were suffering greatly, so to the point that people thought they were going to go extinct. That's how bad the situation was for people. U.S. Highway 50 was first bored through Cave Rock in 1931, and that was to make a lane going through the rock. Before that, you had different trails in the Lincoln Highway passing by, over it, or around it. However, that was going to happen because that, that rock's kind of in the way on your by the side of Lake Tahoe, and then if you going up to the mountains is always a challenge for European systems of transportation. So they always wanted to go where they could kind of get through. So 1931 was when the first hole was bored through the cave to make way for a highway. And then the other tunnel was constructed, I think it was finished in 1957. And again, that was accommodating traffic. And, Lake Tahoe has always been historically a place where wealthy non-native Americans would stay, and the resort industry starts up there, and a lot of wealthy people up that way, and it's been going along for since the late 1800s. You have the emergence of resort kind of things up there. All the while, when all this was going on with this boring and all this, was that the Washoe had no political voices that were heard on a regional or a national level. In other words, they had no way to really challenge what was happening at Lake Tahoe. They had no way to do that. It was in 1966 that the Washoe organized our first tribal council, and the Washoe tribe itself has been going strong ever since. And you can see this history of, just getting in there and trying to claim land and providing services for people, and all kinds of dynamic things have been going on before then, but with the official tribal government or the tribal council being really kind of a marking point where it's like, okay, now there's no turning back. And so we see the Washoe tribe growing and growing and growing and getting stronger, stronger, stronger in that way in terms of political power and having a voice on this landscape of people and equality. And is it perfect? No, but boy, it's a lot better than it was. Okay. So during this time and before, there's always been this concern about Cave Rock. There was a concern when the tunnels were being bored through. There was a concern in the 50s that Warren D'Azevedo was working with the Washoe in the 1950s, and he was hearing things about Cave Rock, and the people were concerned about. Now, the tunnels are never going to be closed. They're part of a highway system. That's not going to happen. But what occurred in the 1990s was the presence of a new and different threat, and that was rock climbing within Cave Rock. So in the 1990s, the Washoe tribe began a long process of legally challenging the U.S. Forest Management of Cave Rock. They are the owners of Cave Rock. And, they ultimately prevailed with the United States Forest Service closing off the rock to technical climbers. And that is an amazing victory for any native group in North America to achieve. It doesn't happen very often, but boy, they did it. And part of that was you have the strong Washoe presence, a lot of elders and people who spoke about contemporary uses of this, and also that you had people here, the ethnographer Warren D'Azevedo, very much present, who had this very historic perspective on how this was, and from his own information and his friendships and talks with people. And then you had Penny Rux was working at the United States Forest Service as the archaeologist there, and she started in on this endeavor too. She was very important, and she's also a Washoe ethnographer. And there's just so many key players that really contributed to helping the tribe gather the information and look at this land use, and it's pretty cool. Anyway, so there you go, a little background. Okay, so these are some pictures of the impacts that have occurred to Cave Rock. You've got the early road there in the upper left-hand corner, the early highway with one borehole going through Cave Rock, and then you have the two two-sided highway of US 50 as it is now. And then on the right-hand side, you have a rock climber just looking, oh, the silhouette. Woohoo! Look at all the technical gear that's pounded into the rock. And that kind of contact. And for a little context here, for you, so you can write this down, and I'm going to say it really badly. I'm so bad with languages, and Washoe is, oh, it's challenging. So Lake Tahoe in Washoe language, this is an anglicized version of Washoe, but one that people go with these days, because linguistically it's really hard to like translate that stuff. It gets kind of crazy. Da'au. So you can see where the Da'au becomes Tahoe in an anglicized version of that. And then I'll try, but I'm not making any guarantees here. The name for cave rock, De'equadapush, something like that. Washoe is very different to Hokan language with glottal stops and stuff, and I'm not a gifted linguist, people. I'm not. Anyway, there you have some spellings for cave rock and Lake Tahoe in Washoe language, which is important. Okay, so I'm going to read a segment from, it's an excerpt that Warren de Azevedo was included in the Two Worlds of Lake Tahoe. This one is written by Joanne Nevers. She is a Washoe historian, and she is a Washoe Native American, and she's done tons of archival research. She's interviewed countless elders. She really is somebody who's very, very knowledgeable about tribal things, life ways, and the history of the tribe. And so this little excerpt kind of features information on the profound importance of Lake Tahoe and Cave Rock in this piece that she wrote for a book in 1976. So I'm going to just read that directly, okay? And then I'll try to say those words, even though now you have them written down, you'll know. Just go, yeah. So this is from Joanne Nevers. As soon as the weather permitted, the Washoe began their annual journey to Lake Tahoe. The Washoe lived around the lake and referred to it as Da'au-aga, which means edge of the lake, is its literal translation, edge of the lake. The pure waters of the high mountain lake offered them more than simple material benefits. Da'au-aga was the life-sustaining water, the center of the Washoe world. The waters of the sacred lake breathed life into the land, the plants, the fish, the birds, the animals, and the people around it. The spring trip to Da'au-aga was the most important gathering for the whole tribe. When the Washoe reached the lake, they blessed the water themselves because they had come to a sacred place. Da'au was the giver of life. It fed fish, animals, and humans. The Washoe respected the land they lived on. Since they did not abuse their campsites, when the Washoe left the area, it was as if no one had been there. Indian doctors traveled to the site at De'equadapush Cave Rock. They went there to meditate. Turning the page. Meditate, meditate. At the site, water babies lived in an underground cave. A monster also lived in a cave in that area. And so you have, just a little bit about the cave, but also just the centrality of Lake Tahoe and Washoe life, which is something that definitely is part of Washoe tradition. Okay, so here's a historic picture of Cave Rock, a black and white photo, and also for your pleasure, so you can understand some of the craziness of doing research and also the changing nature of knowledge. You see a different spelling for what Cave Rock is from what Joanne Nevers had in her account, which is what you saw in the slide before. So here, De'equadapush is slightly modified by other linguists, and it literally translates to standing gray rock. That's the literal translation. So in the other one, I just referred you to Cave Rock and Lake Tahoe, and that's not the literal translation of those Washoe words, but that's just what that refers to. So here you have a slightly different spelling based on linguistic studies. It's a whole different breed of people, those crazy linguists. And this literal translation, standing gray rock, which actually says it all. And even in this picture, you can see how unique Cave Rock is. you know, which really does, it is a standout. It's something you see and notice when you go there. So Cave Rock encompasses about 2 acres of rock and about 300 feet of shoreline. It is 360 feet high from the lake level and about 800 feet wide. It rises to an elevation of 65,060 feet above sea level. Of course, we're at Lake Tahoe, it's high in the mountains. But it's not a huge thing, but it's prominent there. It's not its own mountain range, that's for sure. It's just a volcanic plug. Archaeological evidence suggests that Lake Tahoe has been continually used for at least 10,000 years. The Washoe people are recognized as the descendants of at least the last 1,500 years of occupation, and as recognized currently by archaeologists. Okay, so archaeologists view the last 1,500 years or so to be Washoe people. The Washoe, however, and this is important, understand that they have lived in this area, in this land, for countless generations. They have a different viewpoint than the archaeologists. Every spring, the Washoe people trek to Lake Tahoe to fish and hunt and to gather plants. They camped at recurrently used summer camps that were named places. Every stream running into the lake had a summer camp attached to it. And at those places, the same families would come back and use those camps. And in that division of the Washoe territory in sort of a north and a central and a southern thing that Warren Desavator talks about in his chapter, it corresponded. Those people from the south or from the north went to the same traditional spots on the lake, and you see this kind of mirror of this split of land use in these important zones, which is pretty amazing and actually pretty unique. Cave Rock is an important power place on this landscape. It is a source of power that influences and that can be influenced by the people who visit the rock. The people who visited the rock were shamans, meaning they were native doctors. Cave Rock is the location of an epic confrontation between water babies. Water babies traversed all the waters of the land and controlled their flow. They could be kind of evil, and sometimes people view them as sort of, with ambivalence, but they could be kind of not such great little guys. Also, one of the creators of this landscape, the epic confrontation, was one of the Weasel brothers, one of the figures in the time when animals were people, the time of creation. So that confrontation occurred at the time when the Washoe landscape and the people were forming, the time of creation. Water babies congregate at Cave Rock, and there's an entrance in Washoe belief to a tunnel that allowed them to travel to adjoining Carson Valley waterways. And also shamans could travel along these ways when they were transported into another alternative universe. There was a white sand path that was traveled by Washoe doctors underwater from Cave Rock to a location on the northwest side, the northwest shore of the lake. And so Ong, this man-eating bird that was on the lake, would take its victims to its nest, and that was on an island that's now submerged off of Cave Rock. He would devour them until he was outsmarted by an old man who killed Ong at Cave Rock. These are just some of the little tidbits, and these are just little parts of these stories that I'm sharing with you that indicate how important Cave Rock was in terms of Washoe belief systems of how the world came to be and the figures that are important in forming that world. So, the confrontation with the Weasel brothers and water babies, those are the belief system, a traditional belief system about that. Ong, another figure. But still, when you start collecting stories, when ethnographers start documenting that, what emerges is that Cave Rock has just got its own thing going all the time. Okay, a slightly blurry picture featuring Cave Rock and Lake Tahoe. It's not the best picture, but I wanted to give you some sort of perspective of how prominent that feature is on the landscape. So historically, Washoe doctors, Washoe shamans, with water baby power, were the only Washoe that dared to visit Cave Rock. There they would commune with water babies, acquire power, and effect cures for people. During the post-contact period from 1848 to about 1900, 2 named Washoe doctors, shamans, oh boy, here we go. You don't have to write this down. This is Wela Kushkush and Blind Mike, 2 Washoe shaman, were known to visit Cave Rock to acquire power. They sometimes left offerings. Another gentleman named Henry Moses Rupert, who died in 1965, is known to have continued to use Cave Rock throughout his lifetime. And water babies are a supernatural figure in many belief systems in the Great Basin, and the Washoe are no exception. And you'll get a handle, I think, on kind of water baby character from these excerpts I'm going to read from Dazavedo again. And the first one is the notes of Dazavedo when he was traveling with several people in the 1950s. And they were talking, they were upset about the construction of the new tunnel. And these are the things that, Warren documented as he was doing his work with people. So this is kind of an excerpt from Warren's notes based on these conversations that he's had with several people, men. Okay, so here we go. They agreed that the main home of the water babies was in Lake Tahoe. They don't actually live in the water, but in a country under the water, in their own towns there. They use all the streams and rivers like roads to travel all around wherever they need to go. They come up and camp in caves near the water. Cave Rock was one of their main places at Tahoe. Certain Indian doctors could go there to deal with them. There was a hole or tunnel from the rock that went down through the mountains to Carson Valley. Some doctors knew that way and could go directly up to the rock from the valley in a few minutes. They were friends to the water babies and could do that. B, one of the informants, says he thinks he knows where the entrance is on the west side of the valley, but he doesn't go near there or like to talk about it. He says he heard if the water babies ever got mad about what people were doing there, they would bring a big earthquake. The hole would be opened and the lake would pour down and flood Carson and all the valleys down below. So here you have, some understanding in the Washoe belief system about what water babies are and what they do at Lake Tahoe. And here's another one of those accounts. This one is from James Downs, who wrote an ethnography on the Washoe that was published in the early 1960s, and he was doing research in the 1950s. So this is his summation of what he learned from Washoe informants on this. Doctors were privy to a number of secrets that were not common knowledge among most Washoe. Such a secret was the cave reputed to be inside Cave Rock at Lake Tahoe. This cave was a retreat for shamans who went there to commune with their spirits or to secrete a particularly important piece of paraphernalia. This is me saying this, but paraphernalia is part of a shaman's kit and part of the curing practice. And so it's an important component of the shaman's toolkit. The cave could be entered through a narrow opening on the landward side, but most shamans preferred a more dramatic entrance. By standing on a certain rock and singing a special song, they were lowered through the water and then lifted into the cave. The last doctor to attempt this was Blind Mike. He was directed to go to the cave in a dream. This promontory is a center of water baby habitation and is reported to be the upper end of a tunnel that extends under the mountains to Genoa, which is down in the valley on the east side, so that water babies can move freely from the lake to the valley. The rock also marks, turning the page here, the rock also marks the eastern end of a road of white sand reported across the lake bottom. On the northwest end of the road was located a bed of plants, probably wild parsnips, while doctors gathered for medicine, or actually which the doctors gathered for medicine. So wild parsnips were done that. So that is a nice, both of those are kind of nice summations of the Washoe view of what Cave Rock was and meant in Washoe society, and still means in Washoe society among some people. So recent ethnographic research indicates that modern practitioners, people who are doctors in that way, Washoe doctors / shamans / healers, continue to visit Cave Rock for renewal and curing. And these people look back to past leaders as spiritual mentors. These modern practitioners maintain a degree of reticence and anonymity regarding their calling. So that also makes them not so willing to come forth with information, which is another difficulty of trying to establish a traditional value system for outsiders to understand about a place like Lake Tahoe, because it's sacred knowledge and you don't share that with everybody. So the locations on the rock where doctors practiced were individualized. They were often secret and not consistent from one doctor to the next. So if you had a calling to be a shaman / doctor, it's the same thing. We just use the word doctor because they are healers. Is that you didn't have a calling to become that and train for that, and then it's like, well, then you're going to go to X spot at the rock and you're going to do X this and X that, and there's this prescribed way of doing this. It's all individual practice, and in that, there's places within the rock where these people did this and continue to do so. The timings of practice were individualized, and they were dictated by the dreams and the needs of patients requiring healing. And that's true today. So the disturbance of doctors during ceremonies at the rock are believed to cause sickness, death, or even harmful effects to the doctor, his family, other Washoe people, or the person disturbing the ceremony. In short, you have a very powerful place in a supernatural system that can be dangerous for people, not only Washoe people and the doctors, but also for other non-native people who are, using that place and disturbing things there. And the danger is something that Washoe people really worry about, the danger to anyone, to make them sick or something bad happen. And that's something that I certainly experienced excavating a site up at Lake Tahoe on one of the summer villages that was established on a little creek going in from, it was near state line, right where Nevada and California join, and had some Washoe traditional elders come, and they blessed the site before we started working there because they didn't want us to get sick. And that's part of the story of these places. So you do have, it's not just a concern for only Washoe people, it's a concern for everybody when it comes to understanding places like this and the Washoe conception of that. Here is looking at Cave Rock from the other side, uphill out to the lake, and again, you can just see how prominent it is and how on the edge of the lake it really is, but that's kind of an interesting view of the rock as well. So powerful and important is Cave Rock that many Washoe people continue to believe that the health and integrity of their society may be jeopardized if traditional practices are not observed there. Traditional Washoe assert that Cave Rock is to be avoided by all people except traditional Washoe practitioners who have been called to seek power or knowledge at the rock. So in short, then, doctors, shamans are the people who should use the rock. No one else should be there, okay? Because it's a dangerous place for other people. Many Washoe honor Cave Rock by practicing and requesting avoidance of the rock, or at least having a respectful attitude while there. That's an important component there. If you're going to be there, at least respect the rock, respect that place. They believe Cave Rock as a whole should be avoided, except by those special practitioners, especially the cave, which is considered to be the nucleus of the rock, and the top of the rock is another place to avoid, and the water beneath the rock appears to be particularly taboo. Then again, if this is a place where water babies kind of go back and forth, then that would be particularly taboo because you don't want to run into a water baby. Not a good thing. So I'm going to read you a contemporary account that was done in an interview in 1997. And this person, his grandfather was a famous Washoe shaman who had a spiritual connection with Cave Rock. And that person goes there to pray and care for the rock. Okay, so this is 1997. This is during the gathering of information about Cave Rock in a contemporary context. And this is a quote from, again, Dazzle Vado. This will be the last one I read to you, so I think it's kind of long, though. Anyway, so hang on. Take good notes. Our people never bother that place. That was only for special people. They couldn't stay there, make their camp and fish there. That was a sacred area for people. And people knew if they messed around there, something was bound to happen, and they didn't want that. So they stayed away. People had to camp by Logan Shoals there. They didn't go right to the rock. They didn't trespass. The first thing is that the whole of Lake Tahoe is a sacred area. And Cave Rock is more so because that's where all the shamans and prospective people that wanted to become doctors and shamans, they were the only ones that could go there. I'm just telling people that Lake Tahoe is the center of our world, and it's just sacred to us. These people that stay there, white residents, flipping the page here, okay, so the people that stay there, the white residents, are respectful except for the casinos and stuff. They just want to build and make more money. But the people who have interest in the lake want to conserve the beauty, and they respect our sacred areas. And all these people that live around the lake have seen the contamination and pollution, and they don't like it. We'd hate to have all these corporations come in and ruin it for us. When they put the tunnels through the rock, this is what this person is saying about that. Well, it was just like cutting into your heart, because it's just like a church, and somebody going in there was blasting holes through it. Well, people were saddened by that, but they couldn't do anything about it. It's just like everything else. People come in, they want this, they take it, and if you don't give it up, they blow you away or they get it somehow. Nobody said a word to the tribe, and of course it gives me a pain to think about those rock climbers desecrating and doing all that disrespectfulness. And you've seen along the way people who were injured or something had happened to them. Some of the rock climbers say that they've had bad luck since they started to climb, and things happen to their family. And I know this happens because they were treading where they weren't supposed to tread. One day we were cleaning, hauling out garbage and trash, and 4 rock climbers came to climb. I explained to them that what the rock meant to our people, and they understood what I was saying and where I was coming from. So they declined to climb, and they actually helped carry some sacks of garbage down for us. And after they left, 2 others came up. I asked them how would they like it if I went to their church and pounded in all the hardware and climbed up there and defiled and desecrated it. And they were agreeable about not climbing that day, even though they had traveled a long way to do it. So that's one account of contemporary views of Cave Rock that were collected by the likes of Warren d'Azevedo. So here's a picture of a climber who continued to climb. In contemporary views, the presence of others at Cave Rock is believed to endanger the lives of all people. Those are the contemporary views of Washoe people. Although these contemporary opinions about behavior and use vary, some members of the Washoe tribe believe that the irresponsible actions of unauthorized individuals, people not seeking power in a Washoe sense, in a curing sense, can endanger the safety of those who respectfully stay away. They believe that if respect for Cave Rock is in place, then the act will infuse and restore dignity to the rock. This is believed to enhance the integrity of Lake Tahoe, of the environment of Lake Tahoe, and to promote the safety and well-being of all people, Washoe and non-Washoe alike. So this is a picture of 3 Washoe elders at Lake Tahoe. The lady on the right, Mrs. Teresa Jackson, is the person who actually blessed our site, the summer camp I excavated for my master's thesis. And her sister Joanne Martinez, Mrs. Martinez is on the left. Wonderful people. I'm not sure who the gal is in the middle, and Teresa and Joanne often did stuff together and were very, very important figures in Washoe tradition and also just Washoe life in general. But they were amazing ladies. Anyway, one thing that came out too, looking at these contemporary things, is that traditional Washoe doctoring appeared at Cave Rock to really be limited to men, and there was no mention of women in the ethnographic literature. And you know, one female Washoe spiritualist uses Cave Rock today. That might be different now. But in 1998, a Washoe elder expressed concern regarding female climbing at the site, noting that the presence of women was particularly a desecration. And again, that relates to women were not supposed to be there or even look at Cave Rock. So that was a concern for them as well. So not only just the safety and well-being of all people and the desecration of it, but then you have this kind of gender element in there as well. Okay, so in the 1990s, the issue of Cave Rock as a traditional cultural property arose when the Washoe tribe discovered that rock climbing had become really popular at the Rock. And the Rock is located on public lands that are managed by the United States Forest Service. Again, 1931, 1957, the tunnels were blasted through. 1993, a boat ramp was erected just below the Rock. The tribe did object to the ramp at the time. And then a few years after, there were 59 climbing routes that were established up Cave Rock and inside the cave as well. Installed 300 fixed anchors, cemented over important cave openings, desecrated the site with vulgar graffiti. And this is where I have to laugh at the lack of U.S. Forest Service management, because it's like people were pouring concrete in the cave and they didn't know. I mean, it's sort of like, oh, well, we weren't looking, and when we turned around, there's a housing development on the side of the hill, but when did that happen? I mean, it was a really highly irresponsible of the Forest Service to even allow that sort of thing. The same thing with the collecting of garbage that the gentleman mentions, where it's like, you know, the Forest Service just kind of went, whatever. And really one of the important people in the Forest Service to raise objections about it was my good friend Penny Rex, who kind of got in some trouble over that in her workplace because of that issue. Anyway, so the Washoe wanted to protect the site. They challenged the Forest Service over management of it in 1993. The Forest Service responds, and they say they're going to close a few routes. The tribe points out that they are ranking recreation above cultural resource values. So research began to determine if Cave Rock held traditional values and showed a connection to Washoe heritage. That's a key component of establishing that a traditional cultural property exists, that you have this continuation and continuity and what those traditional values were. And so that's where Warren D'Azeveto's work is so important, because, and Downs and some other people, because they have this historic context to show this, you know, ongoing connection that was documented by these guys. So they were the secretaries for the Washoe tribe in many ways in documenting these sorts of cultural belief systems. So research began, and in 2003, the U.S. Forest Service adopted a management plan that prohibited rock climbing on Cave Rock, along with the removal of bolts, anchors, and other climbing hardware, and the concrete. While rock climbing was banned, other recreational uses were allowed and are allowed at Cave Rock. Then in 2004, the Access Fund, which is a nonprofit advocacy group for rock climbers, filed a lawsuit claiming that Washoe values amounted to following the practice of religion on public lands. And Access claimed that the management plan unfairly singled out climbers. Cave Rock has been a major climbing destination, and climbers thought they could negotiate a compromise when the management plan was approved. But when that didn't happen, they went to court, and they made their appeal that had to do with the violation of the First Amendment, the government setting aside a place for religious purposes, which they do anyway. It's kind of funny. The government coercing the public to the Washoe religious view. You know, heaven forbid we talk about Christianity being imposed in government places as well. The second one was the misappropriation or the misapplication of the National Register. No, the NHPA, which I don't even know what that is. Oh my gosh, that's my typo. It is the National Register that listed the place you know, in 1998, even after years of degradation. Again, that's that misunderstanding that degradation doesn't mean the value is lost to the people. It meant something too. Integrity is not defined by messiness, and it's not defined by people who are looking at that from an outside viewpoint. It's defined by the people who use that spot. So the Washoe did not view the tunnels and the climbing as so impactful. The place had no meaning and no power anymore. They continued that. And then again, the third element they were looking at was discrimination against climbing. But in 2005, a district judge upheld the U.S. Forest Service management plan that disallowed climbing, and that resolved the issue to protecting the site from more adverse effects. This is all kind of government speak for what you do with kind of historic properties that are special in that way. And it recognized that the place was a traditional cultural property, and that it was not creating any sort of state religion. That'd be a good one if the Washoe were able to do that. Yes, it's one of the world religions. Anyway, so that was a big part of this. And this picture I have here, obviously, oh my gosh, what's that called? The forehead place. Okay, I've totally blanked out what that's called. Oh my gosh. Okay, that's sad. Do I even have anything? Okay, you guys know what that is. Oh wait, Mount Rushmore, that's it. And really what you're looking at, this, I obviously am not very good at, you know, making things, but imagine if we saw rock climbers on the face of Mount Rushmore, going up the nose of George Washington or Lincoln. We would find that to be a desecration of this place. And we need to think about a place like Cave Rock in a similar sort of way. It is important to people. And it has different kinds of importance. Not everyone attaches value to Mount Rushmore, you know, but we have to recognize that that value is there, okay? As much as it is one of the stranger monuments in the United States, and yet kind of wild. Anyway, but imagine a rock climber in a cathedral. You know, we just wouldn't do this, but somehow it was okay for all that to happen at Cave Rock. And the tribe successfully takes that on, which is, I can't even tell you, but that's nothing short of a miracle. So in short, this place, this very important place, in spite of highways and tunnels and rock climbing and power lines and boats down below, is declared a traditional cultural property, and it's protected under the National Register of Historic Places, and this is in 1996. And that is upheld by the courts as it's challenged by the Access Group. Okay, so we know there were tunnels that were bored through there, but the hard part, and it's hard to find pictures of this, but I find this to be amazing in terms of management by the Forest Service. You've got the two tunnels, you've got trails and all this stuff. That's one kind of thing going on, or one or two or three or 10 kinds of things going on at the rock. But the cave itself had been defaced with graffiti, and most recently, the rock had become a super popular climbing destination. I mean, really, it was drawing people from all over the place, because apparently it's a very technical climb. You saw that guy dangling from the roof. And see, it's not only technical, but then you get to take pictures like that. Look at my silhouette against Lake Tahoe. Woohoo! So during the 1980s, the 1990s, rock climbers put in bolts and hangers and all kinds of climbing paraphernalia, slings, chain cables, strings. And one climber, at least one climber, had laid a concrete paving area and gravel floor within the cave. That just amazes me. It really does. It's like, what was the Forest Service doing that they didn't notice this was happening? Anyway, yeah, well, we cut down all those trees. Was that not supposed to do that? Huh? So really, they've created quite a mess here, and they are touching it. They're interacting with a powerful place in ways that the Washoe find to be disturbing, dangerous, and offensive. So you have the Cave Rock Management Environmental Impact Statement completed in 2003, and one aspect of that decision, the Environmental Impact Statement, was to remove all climbing hardware. concrete and rock improvements from the cave floor and entrance, and to get non-historic graffiti off the walls if they could. And so after, again, several years of appeals and litigation, part of the decision has been implemented and they're working on it. So in 2009, there was some money put aside to restore and rehabilitate Cave Rock. And so they hired a local landscaper to remove the bolts and paraphernalia. And get a load of this, 5 tons of concrete. 5 tons of concrete. Paving stones, 35 linear feet of graffiti. So somewhere in there with the Forest Service going, what? Somebody went in with that much rock and concrete and paving stones and put it in there to make a nicer floor for the climbers. That's just stunning to me. The graffiti could have been done by all kinds of people, but the climbing stuff is specifically to climbers. Anyway, that just amazes me. I find that to be... Anyway, so here's the guy, you know, trying to get rid of, breaking up the concrete to haul it out of there, and what a job that would be. So, the Washoe at Lake Tahoe. So the Washoe successfully litigated the issue of management at Cave Rock. Now, the Washoe also own the Meeks Bay Resort at Lake Tahoe, and they hold a huge annual cultural festival at the Tallac Historic Site near Lake Tahoe, which is an amazing event that's held every year. With the closure of rock climbing at Cave Rock, they have asserted successfully their traditional authority over U.S. government land management, or the lack thereof in this case, I think is fair to say. In the ownership of the land at the resort and the holding of the big annual festival at Tallac, the Washoe continue to make their presence known they make their presence known not only to the local people and other Native American groups who come to the festivals, but also all those worldwide tourists who come to the lake every year. They continue to cherish and continue their cultural values to pass those along to subsequent generations and to other people across the world. So yeah, in many ways the Washoe tribe is small. It's got a low population. Its tribal lands aren't super huge, but the people have shown that numbers and acres don't matter when issues like Cave Rock come to a head. And when you have the power and the ability to fight, you can fight. And what matters in this one, I think, for me, as somebody who cares about Native people, what matters are the hearts and the values, the voices, and the power that was used to contest how Cave Rock was used and misused, and what a victory it is for them to have that rock climbing closed, and to compromise with what can be done there, what is being done there, but to get rid of that key thing. And to compromise in a modern context is so important. You're never going to get rid of the tunnels. You're never going to close off Cave Rock. That just isn't going to happen. And yet, you have a good outcome in terms of just that physical desecration of that place where, I mean, it's one thing to go through with a car. It's quite another thing to be putting pitons up and crawling all over that place when you have the kind of powerful forces that are concentrated there in the Washoe system of belief. And so, anyway, the Washoe continue, and they continue the fight, and they're doing good stuff. And it's good to see. And from my perspective, having worked with Washoe people and worked with Warren and Penny and people like those guys, I just think it's, pretty cool that the decision came the way it did. And it's just a rare thing. And so that's pretty cool. Anyway, that concludes our shortish lecture on Cave Rock. So there you go.